I'd like to welcome everyone back to this 8-session program, Shamatha Practice, Mindfulness of Breathing. Now we're in session 3. We're continuing the mindfulness of breathing practice, and the main practice that we'll be looking at today is this full body breath practice, which we did last week, but in particular using the shavasana posture for meditation. So we'll be looking at that later in the session. So let's begin first by setting the motivation, so we can each do that individually, and then we'll begin the session. And those of you who are following the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, the highest motivation, of course, is the motivation of bodhicitta. So let's have a look at what we'll be covering in this evening's session. We'll begin as normal with a short review of some of the main points from the earlier sessions. We'll continue the meditation which we looked at in last week's sessions, that is the mindfulness of breathing, focusing on the full body. The topics that we'll be covering in this session this evening is first, what tools do we use in this shamatha practice? And then what faults can arise in this practice and how do we overcome those? What are the antidotes to those faults? And then we'll be looking at the actual practice for this evening. Again, the mindfulness of breathing practice, using the shavasana posture. And then after the meditation, just a few tips for that particular practice, or that posture rather, and then we'll finish as normal with some time for Q&A. So this is the second of the 2 sessions we'll be doing with the full body variation of the mindfulness of breathing practice. Then we'll have 2 sessions on the abdomen, 2 sessions of the nostrils, and then the last session is the integrating into daily life, how to integrate this practice into daily life. And I've added, as you can see here, I've added to the recommended reading, in addition to the Attention Revolution from Alan Wallace, the Lamrim Chenmo, or in other words, the Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment by Lama Tsongkhapa. Particularly here, relevant to Shamatha is volume 3, the first part of that book. So I'll be referring to sections within that in the coming session. So if you want a little bit more of a technical explanation of a lot of these things we're covering, then there's a lot of very good information in that book from Tsongkhapa. And in this 8 weeks, or 8 sessions rather, over 4 weeks, we'll be looking at the prerequisites for shamatha training in session 7. We already looked at the preparation in the first session, and then in the last session we looked at the qualities to cultivate in this practice, what objects to use in this practice, and in this session again we'll be looking at the tools and faults, and then again integrating into daily life in session 8. And we'll be using those charts, those handouts, as a basis for our discussion of the stages of progress in the shamatha training. And we'll be looking at that in some detail in session 4 and session 5. So firstly, in terms of that preparation, we talked about preparing body, speech, and mind. Preparing body is to set up a good posture, to have a relaxed body, to have a straight back, or in other words, a vigilant posture, and then to allow the body to remain as still as possible. And then preparing speech is really a lot about the breathing, because the breathing and the mental chit-chat are very closely related. So if we can simply allow the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm, that's going to have a positive effect on starting to settle the mind as well. But then to really prepare the mind is to allow the mind to come to rest in the present moment, very relaxed, and to rest in that stillness of the present moment. So here we're not talking about making the mind still, forcing the mind to stop its activity. We're really to rest in that stillness is really like putting the car in neutral. That the car in neutral, it's not going anywhere. So we're putting the mind in neutral, meaning we're simply resting in that stillness. There can still be a lot of things going on there, but we're not paying attention to any of it. And we're just staying there in the present moment, of course, with clarity. And from that basis, then we can move into the actual practice. We saw here in the shamatha practice 3 qualities to cultivate. Generally in the meditation texts, they only really talk about stability and clarity. There's not really much mention about relaxation. Again, I think because centuries ago when those texts were written, people tended to be quite relaxed, didn't really need to mention that. But in our modern society, we tend not to be very relaxed, probably have a lot of agitation and tension, chaotic mind. We bring that into meditation practice. And then because our minds are so chaotic, we clamp down when we focus on something, and then we have all sorts of problems in meditation. So here we saw that these are 3 qualities of relaxation, stability, and clarity that we're cultivating in this practice. We are to emphasize them in this order. And we saw the tree analogy there to highlight that first we need to really sink deep roots of relaxation to be able to support a strong trunk of stability. The stronger the trunk of stability, the higher the branches and leaves of clarity can grow. And I really can't overemphasize this importance of relaxation based on my own experience and talking to many, many people, that if we don't have a relaxed body and mind, there is no way we're going to be able to develop any sort of sustainable stability and clarity, that it really is the basis for that. And to really highlight the importance of relaxation, I'd like to read a little bit from Attention Revolution on page 14, where Alan Wallace says the following. He says, "Thus our practice of mindfulness of breathing consists of prolonging our awareness of our breath. While this requires an alert mind, such concentration should not be tense, but rather balanced. When we discover that we've become distracted from the meditation object, it may feel natural to clamp down more forcefully, tightly concentrating the mind. You can see this in the facial expressions of people who try to concentrate in this way. Their lips become pursed, their eyebrows draw together, and their foreheads become furled with wrinkles. They're becoming concentrated, but like orange juice, most of the fluidity is being drained from their minds. If you want to concentrate for a short time and don't mind the side effects of tension and fatigue, you can follow the above strategy. But if you want to follow the path of shamatha, you'll need an alternative." I had to discover this fact through experience. During my first extended shamatha retreat, I was filled with enthusiasm. I wanted to take full advantage of the rare opportunity that was before me, for I was meditating in India under the guidance of the Dalai Lama. I had no financial worries and my material needs were easily met. All I had to do was put the instructions into practice. I threw myself into this training with all my might. Each morning I would rise at 3:30, except once I slept in until 3:45 and got upset with myself for slacking off. Enthusiastic I was, but so uptight. The Tibetan manuals on shamatha meditation that I had studied over the years stated that the type of attention needed when one began such practice was, quote, highly focused. So I tried as hard as I could to keep my mind from wandering. Within a matter of a few weeks, devoting many hours each day to meditation, I could sustain my attention on my chosen object for up to half an hour. I was elated by making such fast progress. As the weeks went by, however, I found myself becoming more and more fatigued. I was draining myself both physically and mentally. My joy in the practice was diminishing accordingly, and I felt my attention was not developing any further. What was wrong? I was trying too hard. The cultivation of shamatha involves balancing the mind, and that includes balancing the effort exerted in the practice with relaxation. I think this points to a cultural difference between traditional Tibetans living in the highlands of Tibet and modern people leading fast-paced lives. Their senses constantly bombarded by telephones, email, the media, and noise. Years of such existence conditioned the nervous system and mind in ways that might have been considered torture in rural Tibet. One traditional Tibetan doctor whom I know once commented on people living in the West. So now he's quoting the Tibetan doctor who says, "From the perspective of Tibetan medicine, you are all suffering from nervous disorders. But given how ill you are coping remarkably well." And then he goes on to say, "Whether we dwell in Boston, Buenos Aires, Berlin, or Beijing, our minds are conditioned to be more high-strung and engaged in compulsive thinking than the minds of Tibetan nomads and farmers living a century ago. So when Tibetan meditation manuals advise beginners to focus their attention firmly, the instructions are aimed at a very different reader than the average city dweller in the 21st century. Before we can develop attentional stability, we first need to learn to relax." And so again, I can't overemphasize this point enough based on my own experience and talking to many, many people. Relax, 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 relax. And then in terms of objects, we saw that quoting from the great Indian master Sangha from the 5th century, Tsongkhapa in the 14th century, Alan Wallace, all basically saying that if you have a highly discursive mind, then definitely you need to focus on the breath. And so that accounts for most of us in the modern world. So mindfulness of breathing is probably the most widely emphasized object in Buddhist traditions. And here in this program, we're looking at 3 variations of that practice. The first one, which we looked at last week and will continue now, is the full body practice. That is to simply observe sensations of the breath or sensations anywhere in the body that are associated with the breathing. Then we'll move to looking focusing in the area of the abdomen, and then lastly focusing on the nostrils in the later sessions. And then Alan Wallace also recommends 2 other objects, observing the mind and resting in awareness. And we saw each one of those have also their own benefits. We also saw that particularly in the Lam Rim Chenmo, the Lam Rim system of practice, very much emphasized to use a mental image of a Buddha for shamatha practice, also has its own unique benefits, but I think for many of us who've tried that, quite difficult to focus on that, quite a complex visualization. And so let's go now to the meditation, continue the meditation we began last session. So that is the mindfulness of breathing, full body. So we're focusing on sensations, tactile sensations throughout the body, any tactile sensations in the body connected, associated with the in and out flow of the breath. Again, the emphasis here is one of relaxation. So let's do that practice now. We begin as always by preparing the body, setting it into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And using the out breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. bringing your awareness to the area of your face and softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. Mouth and jaw soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes soft and relaxed. In this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. And allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. Simply allowing it to flow naturally and effortlessly. And preparing the mind, setting it into a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing it to come to rest in the present moment. Releasing any thoughts that may arise. Remaining in that stillness. And then from that stillness, start to become aware of the tactile sensations throughout the body. Any sensations associated or connected with the in and out flow of the breath. and maintaining an ongoing flow of mindfulness of the sensations of the breath throughout the entire cycle of each in and out breath. And in this practice, the emphasis is on relaxation. So using the out breath as an opportunity to relax and release any tightness or tension, and to release any thoughts that may have arisen. Relaxing more deeply, but not allowing yourself to simply sink into dullness or drowsiness. Maintaining whatever level of clarity you began with. And if you find yourself sinking into dullness or drowsiness, then use the in-breath as an opportunity to arouse and refresh your focus, to sharpen your focus on the breath. And bringing the meditation to a close. So let's go to the first topic for this evening session. So tools. What tools do we use in this shamatha practice? And here we have a very common analogy used, and we see this in the quote here from Bhavaviveka, which he's a great, I think, 6th century Indian Buddhist master. And he says, "The out of control elephant of the mind is to be bound to the firm post of the observed object using the rope of mindfulness and gradually brought under control by the hook of introspection." So we have this analogy, and we see this actually in your chart. So this little color diagram here is the bottom part of the 9 stages to shamatha, which we're going to look at. And so the elephant is often symbolizing the mind, and sort of the wild elephant of the mind, out of control. And we are to tie our mind to the object. In this case here, we're using the breath with the rope of mindfulness. So mindfulness is to be able to hold the object. And then we need to bring it under control by the hook of introspection, meaning we need some quality control to notice if our mind is becoming dull or distracted, and then to bring the mind back. So bringing it under control. So introspection is the second tool, is the quality control. And here we have, I'll just like to quote a little bit from this Lamrim Chenmo, this, of course, this great treatise of the stages of path enlightenment by Tsongkhapa, the sort of primary text that's used in presenting the Lamrim system of practice, the main system of practice in the Golok school of Tibetan Buddhism. And here in volume 3, which includes the Shamatha and Vipassana section, on page 48, Tsongkhapa says the following. He says, "Here, concentration refers to your attention remaining one-pointedly on an object of meditation. In addition, it must stay with the object continuously." And he says 2 things are needed for this. 1, a technique in which your attention is not distracted from whatever it has as its original object of meditation. And 2, an accurate awareness of whether you are distracted or whether you are becoming distracted. And he says the former is mindfulness, the latter is vigilance. So here in this translation, it's been translated as vigilance rather than introspection. I personally think that's not the best translation, and we'll see why. Vigilance is, I think introspection is a better translation when we have a look at that in a little bit more detail. So here then we have a quote from, again, a Sangha, the 5th century Indian master. A lot of this shamatha is coming from a Sangha. From his text they're using as a basis for this. He says, "Mindfulness and introspection are taught, for the first prevents the attention from straying from the meditative object, while the second recognizes that the attention is straying." And then another quote from Panchen Losam Chigi Gyaltsen, a great 16th, 17th century master within the Golok school of Buddhism. And here in his Mahamudra text, he says the following in the Shamatha section. He says, "Mindfulness is principle, and if this is present, then introspection, which is said to be the result of mindfulness, comes naturally." So of the 2 tools, mindfulness is primary, and simply by cultivating and improving mindfulness, then our ability to introspect, our quality control, naturally improves. So let's have a look at each of those 2 in more detail. First, mindfulness. Now, mindfulness here is a translation of the original Sanskrit term smrti, or the Pali term sati. And so we have 2 quotes here from both the Mahayana and the Theravada traditions on mindfulness. And the first is from again, a Sangha. He comes within the Mahayana Buddhist traditions. He says, "What is mindfulness?" He says, the non-forgetfulness of the mind with respect to a familiar object, having the function of non-distraction. And then a quote from Buddhaghosa, one of the main commentators in the Theravada Buddhist traditions, an Indian commentator from also contemporary of Asanga, about the 5th century. And he says, mindfulness has the characteristic of remembering. Its function is not to forget. It is manifested as guarding. So we see both in the Theravada and Mahayana Buddhist traditions a very similar description of mindfulness. And in fact, both the original Sanskrit term smrti and the Pali term sati literally mean memory, to remember. So mindfulness is our ability to remember the object, to not forget the object. So then we have a very simple definition of mindfulness. Here we see below, the faculty of sustaining voluntary attention continuously upon a familiar object without forgetfulness or distraction. So that's a sort of typically how mindfulness is defined within all schools of Buddhism. What we need to be aware of is that in a lot of modern day mindfulness traditions, they've redefined what the word mindfulness means. And so what we find in a lot of modern day traditions, and a lot of this I think is coming out from, particularly from John Kabat-Zinn from his mindfulness-based stress reduction, a lot of them tend to define mindfulness in the following way: as a non-judgmental awareness of whatever is arising in the present moment. Of course, this is a wonderful thing to do, but this is not really how the word mindfulness was originally defined in the Buddhist context. So therefore, we need to be aware of this difference, and that mindfulness has been redefined to mean something slightly different in modern day traditions. Otherwise, we might get a little bit confused. So again, mindfulness in Buddhism is really to remember the object, our faculty of holding the object, focusing on the object without forgetting it, without becoming distracted. So a little bit more about mindfulness. So again, quoting from Asanga, he says, what is mindfulness? There are 3 things here: the non-forgetfulness of the mind with respect to a familiar object and having the function of non-distraction. So we can talk about 3 features of mindfulness here. The first is the object, which of course is a familiar object, because if it's an unfamiliar object, it's going to be very difficult to focus on it. And I think that's why often also many people find focusing on it, for example, a mental image of a Buddha, quite challenging, because it's not a very familiar object to us in the modern world. Whereas the breath is something very familiar to us. It's there all the time. We know it very well. So it's have a familiar object. And then the subjective aspect is how we are attending to that object. And here we're simply attending to it in terms of not forgetting it. So in shamatha, we're not attending to things by investigating, analyzing why, what. We're not doing any investigation on the object. We're simply, the subjective aspect is to remember it, to simply not forget the object. And the function, of course, of mindfulness is to keep the mind from wandering from the object. So the analogy is that the rope of mindfulness, we're tying our mind with a rope of mindfulness to the object, so to not wander from the object. And so here, similar, we see again in the Lamrim Chema from Tsongkhapa, he says, it is said that you achieve concentration on the basis of mindfulness, and that mindfulness is like a rope that actually fastens your attention to the object of meditation continuously. So mindfulness is the main technique to sustain in achieving concentration. So again, like Panchen Losang Chigi Gyaltsen, the main tool we use is mindfulness, holding the object. And by doing that, naturally, introspection, our ability to monitor that, will naturally improve. So let's have a look at introspection in a little bit more detail. So introspection is translation of the Sanskrit term samprajanya. And again, sometimes this word is translated as alertness, or as we saw in the Lamrim Chenno translation, vigilance. But I think both alertness and vigilance are not so, they're too broad in meaning. That yes, we need to be alert and vigilant, but introspection is always inwardly focused. hence introspection, specting intro, looking internally within ourselves. Whereas we can be alert or vigilant to all sorts of external things. So here they're a little bit too broad, where introspection is really specting intro. So we'll see this in how it's defined, both again in the Mahayana and the Theravada Buddhist tradition. So here for Mahayana traditions, we're quoting Shantideva, great 8th century master, from his, I think from his Bodhisattva Charyavatara text. He says, in brief, this alone is the definition of introspection, the repeated examination of the state of one's body and mind. And Buddhaghosa, again, from Theravada, he says, introspection has the characteristic of non-confusion. Its function is to investigate. It is manifested as scrutiny. So both of those, again, to scrutinize, to examine the state of one's body and mind. And so here we have a definition of introspection. It's simply a mental faculty having the function of monitoring the state of one's body and mind. And here, particularly in practice of shamatha, it says its principal function is to note the occurrence of laxity and excitation. So of course, also we use introspection to monitor the body. You know, is our posture still good? Are we sort of hunching over and we tighten the body and so forth? So that's also within introspection. But the main function of introspection is to notice if our mind is becoming dull or distracted. Here, laxity and excitation. So these are the two main tools we use, and we see that again in that chart. We saw that down the bottom there, we have that the meditator in their left hand was the rope, in the right hand the hook of introspection, the rope of mindfulness. And so now if we go to the the second main topic for this evening session is faults. What sorts of faults can arise in shamatha training, and how do we overcome those faults? So again here, quoting from Panchen Losang Chökyi Gyaltsen, the shamatha section, his Mahamudra text, he says, shamatha is attained by progressing through the 9 stages, relying on the 8 antidotes to abandon the 5 faults. And so here we have this color diagram of this 9-stage model that we're going to look at in the next session, the next 2 sessions in quite some detail. So let's have a look at these 5 faults and the 8 antidotes to apply to these 5 faults. So the first fault is laziness. And so like everything in our life, if we see no benefit in some sort of activity, we're going to be very lazy when it comes to doing it. Similarly here with this shamatha practice, if we don't really appreciate the benefits of the shamatha practice, we're going to be very lazy when it comes to doing it. So here we find there are 4 antidotes for laziness, and each antidote builds on the earlier one. So the first antidote is faith. And so faith here means to reflect on the benefits of shamatha practice, to understand that this shamatha practice is going to bring us a lot of benefits, and thereby have faith in shamatha, the faith that this shamatha practice is really going to benefit us a lot. And then the more faith we have that shamatha will really benefit us, the more we'll have the second antidote, aspiration. The more we will aspire to do the practice. And the more we aspire to do the practice, the more enthusiasm and effort we'll actually put into the practice. And then the more enthusiasm and effort we put into the practice, the more we'll have what's called pliancy. Pliancy here means flexibility or serviceability of body and mind. And we'll talk more about pliancy in a later session, but very briefly, now our body and mind are not very flexible or serviceable. We have a lot of heaviness in the body. We have a lot of resistance in the mind to doing things. And so that is not very flexible or serviceable. And so that will change. We'll become more pliant the further we go into shamatha practice. We'll talk more about that in detail later. So I'd like to then go back to the Lamrim Chenmo here, Tsongkhapa's text, to look at what he says about how to stop laziness. So this is on page 33 of the text. So let's go to page 33. Just scroll up a little bit. Okay. And he says the following: if you cannot stop the laziness of being disinclined to cultivate concentration and of enjoying things that are not conducive to it, from the outset, you will not gain entry into concentration. Even if you do attain it once, you'll be unable to sustain it, so it will quickly deteriorate. Therefore, it is most crucial to stop laziness in the beginning. When you attain pliancy, in which your mind and body are full of delight and bliss, you will stop laziness inasmuch as you'll be able to cultivate virtue all day and night without weariness. To develop this pliancy, you must be able to have continuous enthusiasm for the concentration that causes pliancy. To develop this, so he's going backwards in the antidotes. He says, to develop this enthusiasm, you need a continuous, intense yearning that is intent on concentration. As a cause for this yearning, you need steadfast confidence in and fascination for the good qualities of concentration. So to start with, cultivate again and again a confidence that is aware of the good qualities of concentration. When you see this process in practice, you will understand this most vital point with the clearest sense of certainty. So very important to really appreciate and reflect on the benefits of the practice. And we looked at some of those in the first session, and we'll come back to them a little bit in a little bit of a later session. So that is the first fault and how to overcome laziness. Then the second fault here is forgetfulness. And forgetfulness can either be forgetting the instructions or forgetting the object. And so the antidote, of course, is mindfulness. Mindfulness is to remember the instructions and to remember the object. So we've just looked at that now. And so now the next is the two main imbalances once we actually enter into the practice, and that is laxity and excitation. And the antidote for this is introspection. And then we'll look at what is non-application and the antidote of application, and over-application equanimity. So let's go to laxity and excitation now. So remember, introspection is quality control. Introspection's job is to notice if laxity or excitation are arising. So first, excitation. Let's have a look at what that is. In Tibetan, it's gerpa. And so again, a quoting here from Asanga, he says, what is excitation? It is an unquiet state of mind considered a derivative of attachment, which pursues pleasant objects and acts as an impediment to shamatha. And so here, the imbalance we see listed not as distraction, but as excitation. The reason being is that excitation is the most common form of distraction. Our mind gets a little bit agitated because we're being pulled away by something very pleasant. And we see that in the three features of excitation. So again, the object of excitation is some attractive and pleasant object. The subjective aspect is that our mind gets quite agitated and starts to scatter outward away from the object. And the function of excitation is that it impedes stabilization of your mind on subject. So again, that's the opposite of stability of attention. So it impedes being able to hold the object. We start to get scattered and distracted from the object. And here we see the fact that excitation is really about being pulled away by something pleasant. We see that in your shamatha diagram here. So I've zoomed in a little bit on the middle part here, and it says that we get distracted. Our most common form of distraction is we get pulled away by the so-called sense pleasures. And so, of course, we have 5 types of sense objects. So we see in this diagram here down the bottom left there, we see some fruit. So that is taste. Beside that, we have a silk cloth. So that is tactile or touch. Above that, we have 2 round objects here, which are symbols. So that is sound. And then to the left of that, we have a conch shell with some perfume in it. So that is smell. And then diagonally above that here, we have a round object, a mirror. So that's visual. So those are the 5 sense objects, which are the most common form of distraction. So hence here, the imbalance is usually listed as excitement or excitation rather than simply distraction. And then in terms of the other imbalance, laxity or chingwa in Tibetan. This is sort of like the technical word for dullness. So let's see how laxity is defined. It says here, laxity means, and this is coming from the Lamrim Chenmo here, laxity means that your mind's way of apprehending the object of meditation is slack, and it does not apprehend the object with much vividness or firmness. So laxity is the fault that's stopping clarity of attention. So distraction or excitation is what's interfering with stability of attention, whereas laxity is what's interfering with clarity of attention. With both laxity and excitation, we have 3 levels. And we see this in one of your other handouts that we're going to look at, this chart here. If you have it handy, the 3 levels are listed down the bottom, but we have them mentioned here on the slide. So we can divide both excitation and laxity into 3 levels. The first, the coarse level of excitation, is, it says, the attention completely disengages from the meditation object. So very coarse level of excitation is when we're completely distracted from the object. Medium excitation is where, here it says, involuntary thoughts occupy the center of attention while the meditative object is displaced to the periphery. You probably have noticed this already. Maybe you're focusing on the breath and thinking about, what you're going to do after the session. So much so that you're mainly thinking about what you're going to do after the session, but you're still focusing a little bit on the breath. That's medium excitation. You don't completely lose the object, but you're mainly sort of caught up in something else. Whereas subtle excitation is the reverse. You're mainly focused on the object, and a little bit in the background of your mind, there's a lot of other things going on as well. So that's subtle excitation. Similarly, we can talk about 3 levels of laxity. Coarse laxity is very heavy sinking. And it says the attention mostly disengages from the object due to insufficient vividness. So, of course, the most heavy level of laxity is you fall asleep in meditation. But a less heavy level is you'll get so dull, nothing's registering. You're not quite asleep, but nothing's registering. But coarse laxity can be still that you're still a little bit there, but you're mostly disengaged. Medium laxity is where the object appears, but there's not much vividness or clarity. It's there, you're focused on it, but it's not so clear. Whereas subtle laxity is that the object is there, it's very clear and vivid, but your attention is slightly slack. So what we see with each one of these imbalances, we go from coarse to subtle. And what we'll see in the coming sessions when we go through these 9 stages, that in the beginning stages, of course, we tend to have very coarse excitation, very coarse laxity, and we're dealing with those. But as we move along these 9 stages, we're refining, and dealing with more and more subtle levels of laxity and excitation. And we'll look at that in the process in the shamatha diagram a little bit later. And then if we continue, it says, again, quoting Tsongkhapa Lamrim Chenmo, he says, it is not enough just to have an understanding of laxity and excitation. You have to be able to develop introspection that accurately detects whether laxity or excitation is present during meditation. So again, we have to keep improving quality control to pick up more and more subtle levels of excitation and laxity. So how to remedy? So first, how to remedy excitation. Again, we have a quote here from Shantideva. He says, if excitation occurs, calm it by bringing impermanence to mind. So this is if you've got quite strong excitation, you're being pulled away by a lot of particularly pleasurable things, then it's helpful to calm the mind by bringing impermanence to the mind, by understanding that all these things where you're distracted are temporary, fleeting. They're not really going to bring us anything to lose interest in them. But it says here, again in Lamrim Chenmo, for excitation that is not so dominant, if we're just a little bit agitated, a little bit distracted, he says, draw in the scattered attention and fix your attention upon the object of meditation. So we've become scattered, we bring it back. And so here we have 3 key words that can be helpful as a beginner to remind us of what to do. That is, first, relax, because often when we get a bit excitation or a bit distracted, we're already a little bit tense, and we tend to get frustrated when we get. So the first thing to do when we notice we're a bit of excitation or distraction, relax body and mind, and then release, let go of the distraction, and very gently return to the breath. So relax, release, return every time we get distracted. So that can be helpful to remind us what to do, particularly as a beginner, while we're learning how to remedy things like excitation and distraction. And then how to remedy laxity. And again, Shantideva, quoting Shantideva, he says, if your mind becomes slack, inspire by cultivating delight. So again, if you have quite heavy laxity and dullness, then we need to uplift the mind, inspire it. And here, how to do that, we see again in Lamrim Chenmo. He says, here is the most important remedy for stopping laxity. When you reflect on the benefits of bodhicitta and the great significance of attaining leisure means having this life full of leisure and opportunity. By reflecting on these, it should have a bracing effect on your mind, that we don't want to waste our life in all of these meaningless distractions. But to be able to do that, he says, this depends on your having had experience with discerning analytical meditation on these beneficial topics. And we'll talk about this a little bit in a later session, that if we don't do these so-called preliminary practices, such as reflecting on precious human life and death and so forth, then we just really get caught up in distraction. And I'll talk more about that later. But also he says, if the laxity is very slight and occurs only infrequently, then he says, basically just tighten your apprehension on the object and continue meditating. So here again, 3 key terms that can help us, remind us what to do as we're learning the practice is, if we're getting dull, lethargic, getting dull or drowsy, and we find that we've lost interest in the practice, then refresh our interest in the practice. Again, maybe cultivating some of the, looking at some of the benefits of the practice and so forth. Then restore our attention on the object, and then retain an ongoing flow of mindfulness. So just, again, sharpen the focus on the object if we're sinking a little bit. So that's how to remedy laxity. And then the fault of non-application. Non-application means that we have noticed that we've become dull or distracted, but we don't do anything about it. So that's a problem. So again, here from Lamrim Chenmo, he says, you develop very powerful mindfulness and introspection through proper use of the methods for maintaining mindfulness and introspection. Introspection is then able to notice even very subtle laxity and excitation. So even if you notice it, but he says, however, if you make no effort to stop these two as soon as they arise, your complacency or failure to apply yourself constitutes an extremely serious problem for your concentration. For if you practice in this way, meaning if you don't correct the laxity or excitation, your mind will form bad habits, and then it will be extremely difficult to develop a concentration free of laxity and excitation. Therefore, to remedy a failure to apply yourself to the elimination of laxity and excitation, we need to cultivate the intention called application or effort. So soon as we notice some laxity or excitation, then application. We need to have the intention to correct that, to apply the antidotes. Again, what we saw previously is generally, if we're distracted, come back to the object. If we're dull, sharpen the focus on the object. And then the last fault is the fault of over-application. So this only really comes very high in the practice. And it says here, what it means is, again, quoting Lamrim Chenmo, by continuing to meditate after eliminating even subtle laxity and excitation, your mind will enter a state of equipoise. Equipoise just means balance, that is free from the imbalances of either laxity or excitation. At this point, it is a fault of concentration to apply or exert yourself. So cultivate equanimity as a remedy for this. And here he says, this entails relaxing the effort but not sacrificing the intensity of the way you apprehend the object. Meaning that when we get to the point where we've really eliminated even subtle laxity and excitation, we're completely focused on the object, then we need to relax the effort, of exertion, of focusing on the object, of introspection and so forth, because that imbalances us. So we need to relax the effort, but not to sink, of course. And we'll talk more about this equanimity a little bit later in the later session. Just here for your information, equanimity is used in 3 different contexts. Often equanimity means simply the neutral feeling. You know, we can talk about pleasant, unpleasant, neutral feeling. So that's also sometimes called equanimity. And then, of course, equanimity is one of the 4 immeasurables. So that's equanimity there. And then we have equanimity here with respect to application. So there are 3 different uses of the word equanimity. They all sort of mean balance, but they're used in a different way in each of those 3 contexts. So not to confuse them and think there's only one usage of the word equanimity. So that brings us to the actual practice now. So we're going to do the same practice we've been doing, that is the mindfulness of breathing, focusing on full body. So just noticing sensations anywhere in the body connected with the breath. But here we're going to do this together with the shavasana posture, that is the corpse posture, lying flat on your back, because that is particularly conducive, of course, for relaxation. So let's have a look here what Alan Wallace says in Attention Revolution. He says, although Buddhism generally encourages cross-legged meditation, the Buddha encouraged his followers to practice in any of 4 postures of walking, standing, sitting, and lying down. Any of these positions is perfectly suitable. If you tend toward excitation, you may find lying down especially helpful for releasing the tightness and restlessness of the body and mind. But if you're more prone to laxity, you may simply fall asleep whenever you lie down. So it may be necessary for you to be upright when meditating. And so this shavasana posture can be used in a number of cases. One is that it's very conducive for relaxation. So if we're the sort of person who's very agitated and tense, and you find you can't release the tension in the body, then shavasana posture may be just the right posture for you to meditate. So we can even have that as our normal meditation posture if we're normally very tense and agitated. But if we're, as Alan Wallace says, if we tend to be the person who's tends to be more dull than agitated, then if we use our shavasana posture, we'll probably just fall asleep when we meditate. So therefore, we probably have to sit upright. But also, the shavasana posture can be very helpful if we are tired and fatigued, we're sick or injured, and we still want to meditate, and we find sitting upright is too difficult. Then we can use shavasana posture. I use it quite a lot in a retreat setting towards the end of the day, when maybe a little bit tired. Then I use the shavasana posture for the latter part of the day for meditation sessions. And we can use the shavasana posture as a transition for sleep as well. And we'll look at that also a little bit later. So let's now do the practice. So hopefully you've got somewhere nearby where you can lie down, either a bed or a cushion or something, to do this practice. So I'll just explain the practice and then we'll go into the meditation. So the shavasana, the posture, is we are simply lying flat on our back, the feet slightly apart, the arms are slightly away from the body, and the palms facing upwards. And you can have a little cushion underneath your head and even under your knees, because sometimes people find if they're lying flat, their knees are hyperextending a little bit. So you can put something under your knees so your knees are a little bit bent if you find that more comfortable. Now, the object of this practice, again, is we are focusing, as the earlier practice, the tactile sensations anywhere in the body that are associated with the in and out flow of the breath. So the emphasis, again, is of relaxation. Now, for this, the eyes, particularly since we're using the shavasana posture, if you're the sort of person who tends to get more dull and drowsy, I would recommend to have them at least slightly open. If you get really agitated, you can still have them lightly closed. So therefore, if you're having them slightly open, then if you have you're lying in your bed, of course, if you have ceiling light, you might like to turn that off or dim it at least. Otherwise, it's a bit sharp, the lights on your eyes. Again, we're using bare attention, meaning we're not imagining the breath or visualizing the breath. We're focusing on the actual sensations. And as before, allowing the breath to flow naturally, not trying to control the breath in any way, and emphasizing relaxation. So again, the emphasis here is on relaxation. So particularly on the out breath, relaxing and releasing any tension in the body and releasing any thoughts that have arisen in the mind. But again, it's the balance. So even though we're emphasizing relaxation here, not losing the clarity that you began with. So again, if you find yourself drifting into dullness or drowsiness, then particularly use the in-breath to arouse and refresh and sharpen the focus. So that's the practice we're going to do now. So let's do that practice now. So I'll give you some minutes to set yourself up in the shavasana posture before I'll start the meditation. And as you're settling into the postures, again, we're lying simply flat on our back, the feet slightly apart, the arms slightly away from the body, and the palms facing upwards. And for this, particularly helpful to have a dimly lit room, or soften the lights at least, because otherwise the ceiling light might be a little bit intense. So let's begin the practice. As an act of loving kindness for yourself, allow your awareness to descend into the body. Right down to the ground. And simply becoming aware of the sensations of where your body is touching the cushion or the floor. And then allow your awareness to rise up and fill the entire space of the body. And simply becoming aware of sensations throughout the body. And if you notice any areas of tightness or tension in any part of the body, then use the out breath to relax and release that tightness or tension. Bringing your awareness to the area of the face and softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. Mouth and jaw soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes soft and relaxed. And in this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And allowing the mind to come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. Relaxed, still, and clear. And from that stillness, start to become aware of the sensations throughout the body. Any sensations connected with or associated with the in and out flow of the breath. And maintaining an ongoing flow of mindfulness of the sensations of the breath throughout the entire cycle of each in and out breath. And if you notice any agitation, tension, or distraction, first thing to do is simply relax. Then release any distractions and very gently return to the breath. So relax, release, and return. Keep coming back to the breath again and again, patiently and happily. And if you find yourself falling into any dullness or drowsiness, then use the in-breath as an opportunity to arouse and refresh your focus, to sharpen your focus on the breath. And we can bring the meditation to a close. Now, a good way to get up from the shavasana posture is to first bend the left knee and then roll over onto your right side. And then when you're ready, use your hands to help push yourself into a seated upright position. So that's a good way to transition from shavasana posture rather than just abruptly sitting up. So just a couple of tips for the practice, and then we've got a little bit of time for Q&A. As I mentioned earlier, adjust lighting, particularly if you have strong ceiling lights. I mean, personally, I like to have complete dark. But if you're also a person gets very dull very easy, maybe a completely dark room is not a good idea. So adjust the lighting to suit your own disposition. You can use a little bit, cover yourself with a shawl or blanket if it's a bit cold. Again, have a little cushion under your head, even a cushion under the knees to bend the knees if they're hyperextending. Palms facing upwards when you have your arms to the side of the body. That helps to open the shoulders, so that's good. And as I just mentioned, how to arise from the shavasana posture is a good way to get up. Also, to only use this posture for meditation. Now, if you've never done this sort of meditation in this posture, you probably find that when you do this, you probably get very drowsy and even fall asleep. Because now we have a mental association that means when the body is horizontal, that's sleep time. Whereas if we use this particular posture for meditation, then if we keep doing that, we'll start to build up a mental association that this particular horizontal posture doesn't mean sleep, it means meditate. And then we can actually find ourselves be able to meditate without drifting into dullness or drowsiness. When to use this posture? When we're extremely agitated, we can't relax. When the body is tired and we want to continue to meditate. And for some people, we can even use this as a normal posture if we're the sort of person who's really highly strung, very agitated, very tense, and we find we can't really relax sitting upright. Then use this posture as your normal one. And then use as a transition to sleep. How to use as a transition to sleep is that at the end of the day, often if we've had a very hectic, busy day, maybe still a lot of agitation and stress in the body, a lot of things churning over in our mind, we go to bed, we're toss, turn, and we can't get to sleep. So therefore, when you go to bed, go into the shavasana posture, do this meditation practice, relaxing and releasing any tension on the out-breath, releasing any thoughts on the out-breath. And when you start to get mentally drowsy, you mentally note meditation is now finished, and then you physically move out of this posture into whatever posture you use for sleep. So we can really, an effective tool for using for a transition to sleep. So that's all I wanted to cover. We've still got maybe 5 or 10 minutes to go. So if there's any questions, then Miffy's going to, I think, present those now. So we got any questions, Miffy?
Not yet.
Not yet?
No.
Oh, not a one.
I'm not sure if everybody's accidentally fallen asleep on the floor.
Oh, that's probably what happened. Everyone fell asleep in the shavasana meditation, so no one to ask any questions.
I had a question. I mean, it's not really a question, but just when you're talking about the 3 different levels of, say, distraction or laxity, the coarse and middling. So the extremely coarse being, say, falling asleep, that doesn't even figure in that scale, does it?
Well, yeah, it's beyond the scale.
Right.
It's off the scale.
There's not much that I can console myself about then.
Actually, no, but actually I got a story about that. Is some years now ago, I was following a Mahamudra program from a great Mahamudra teacher, Tai Situ Rinpoche in the Kagyu tradition. And he used to lead guided meditations as part of the thing. And we used to have like 300 people in the room. And, you know, there were particularly a lot of Asians as well. But he would be guiding meditation. And then, you know, and then often people would be going like this. I'll try and mimic it. You know, the head dropping down and up. And he commented on more than one occasion at the end of a guided meditation, he says, I'm very happy to see this, he says, because at least I know you're not tense.
Okay. And we're trying to stay awake. So
Yeah, I mean, really, as I mentioned earlier, the relaxation, I mean, the tension, uh, I think for beginners, one of the main problems we have so much difficulty in meditation is we're simply too tight, we're too tense, we're trying too hard. Because that's the way we work in daily life, that if we want to achieve something, we're going to need to put a lot of effort, we need to push hard, you know. And so we try and do that in meditation, and then of course we get distracted, and we think the reason we got distracted is I didn't clamp down hard enough, and so we clamp down even harder on the object. We get completely agitated, we get completely exhausted, and people say, I get headaches when I meditate. I mean, we're just way too tight, way too tense. So, I mean, that's not good for the body or the mind and daily life in general. So, I mean, we really need to reprogram ourselves in the modern world to that basis of relaxation. Because now we tend to have two extremes in daily life. Either we're alert and tense, or we're relaxed and very drowsy. And we oscillate between those two.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is combine those two here. We're trying to have that complete basis in relaxation and at the same time be alert. So that's something we're not used to. We don't know how to do that. So how to do that is we start with relaxation, to reprogram ourselves in the basis of relaxation. So again, initially we're not trying to improve clarity or anything. We're just trying to establish the basis in relaxation. And then on that basis, then we can work on improving stability and clarity of attention. Again, I can't overemphasize enough. I know from my own experience in talking to so many people.
So there are a couple of questions, Glenn. So one from Andrew, that Alan Wallace in his book gets into topics like lucid dreaming and dream yoga, and those don't seem like Buddhist topics, or are they?
Lucid dreaming itself, no, but dream yoga, absolutely. Because, and particularly dream yoga is very much well, it comes a lot in the higher levels of Buddhism, particularly in the area of Tantra and so forth, but it's really in conjunction with Vipassana practice. Particularly in the Mahayana, we talk about the Vipassana practice of emptiness, that nothing exists as it appears. There seems to be an independent world there, but if we come to realize emptiness, we realize that's not the case. And actually, to be able to develop lucid dreaming is really like, it's very similar actually to realizing emptiness in daily life, in that in a lucid dream, there seems to be an independent dream world, but we know because we're lucid, things do not exist as they appear. And so by being able to develop that lucid dreaming, then we can apply that to do this sort of Vipassana practice to help deepen our experience and so forth. And that can really feed into the Vipassana practice of emptiness. So lucid dreaming itself, no, but being able to do lucid dreaming can really help us as a vehicle within the Vipassana practice of emptiness.
Okay, and then from Sue Wall, in the context of shamatha, what's the difference between mind and awareness?
Oh, that's a big question. I'll try and give the short answer. Generally, the word mind or consciousness tend to be generic terms, a sort of overarching term, whereas awareness tends to be more specific in its usage. The problem is, though, awareness is a very popular translation used by different translators. So unfortunately, what we find, particularly in what I see in Tibetan Buddhism, it may be the same in other schools of Buddhism, but in Tibetan Buddhism, this word awareness is overused by different translators to translate different terms to have different meaning. For example, I've seen a couple of translators, what we translate here as introspection, they translate as awareness. And then awareness can, when it's used generically, can mean just mind or consciousness. And in some traditions, such as Mahamudra and Dzogchen within Tibetan Buddhism, the word awareness is used specifically to talk about the very subtle level of mind. That in the Geluk, we talk about this mind of clear light. In Kagyu, in the Mahamudra Dzogchen traditions, they use the word awareness to describe that. And sometimes awareness is used more as a verb in terms of being aware of things. So the word awareness is used to mean a lot of different things. So it can be very confusing. But if we speak very generally, then we can often say that mind, consciousness, awareness are the same thing. You know, when we say observe the, observing the mind, or observe our consciousness, or observe awareness, it means the same there. But again, just be aware that this word awareness is heavily used to mean many different things. So the bottom line is, when we see the word awareness used, we have to dig a little bit to see, how is this person using this word in this context? That's the short answer.
Fantastic. Well, that's it for the, oh no, there's one more. From Andrew, just saying he gets a little deflated reading Alan's book, because he says that you're unlikely to get past the second stage in daily practice and you need to spend months in retreat. Is there any hope for us?
Maybe I'll talk about that a bit later, but the short answer, of course, is that any effort we put in, even if we get to stage 2 or 3, already our attention skills are improving. Already we're less the slaves of our mind. We're starting to become more in control of our own mind. So already we're receiving benefits. So it's not like if I don't get to shamatha, I won't have any benefit. That's not true. So therefore, whatever effort we can put into this practice, whatever benefit, however far we get, we'll get that benefit. And then, of course, what you'll find is that as you progress in this practice, you probably find that things will shift and change in your life, and suddenly you have more opportunity to do more and so forth. So, but anyway, some of this I'll talk about it in the coming sessions. When we go through those 9 stages, I'll touch on a few of these points.
And so then Ian also asked about during the shavasana posture, he finds that he drifts off to other stories and pictures. It's like the brainwave frequencies are slowing down. Is there like a way to come back without being, really jarring?
Yeah. Well, first off, if it's distraction, if it's dullness, then I would recommend, a bit more light and maybe have the eyes open a little bit. But it's the same as in meditation, is that when you drift off, you just, first thing is to relax, to release distraction, come back. It's just come back. And again, if we've not meditated using the shavasana posture before, then we don't have that mental association. In fact, we probably have a very strong mental association that horizontal body means either sleep or daydream. And so that's what's going to happen. No? So all we've got to do is reprogram ourselves, and that'll take time. So be kind to yourself, be patient and persistent, and then it'll change. Fantastic.
So that little mantra of relax, is it relax, release, refocus?
Relax, release, return. Yeah.
Return. Relax, release, return. Brilliant.
Keep coming back patiently and happily. Not these unrealistic expectations, and I'll talk more about that in tomorrow's session when we start to look at these 9 stages. So that's one. Yeah. Anyway, that'll come tomorrow. Okay. So let's leave it there. So again, let's just a few moments, sit quietly and dedicate all of our efforts from this evening's session. And then you can dedicate according to the motivation you set at the beginning of the session. And then Thursday's session is, we're going to move to the abdomen practice, so focusing on the area of the abdomen. And as already mentioned, we'll also in that session start to look at the 9 stages to shamatha. So if you have printed a copy of this one and this one here, these two, or even the 3 handouts, if you have those handy, because then you can scratch right on them and so forth as well. But I'll be putting them into the slides as well, but have those handy. And so that's for Thursday. So until Thursday, Stay safe, stay well. See you Thursday evening.